Hello and welcome to our next episode, our next edition of our discussion on victimology. Today we're going to be talking about restitution and the importance of restitution and how restitution is established and why restitution is important within our criminal justice system. Restitution is when offenders, creative restitution. And well, before I get into that, restitution is a payment made to the victims of crime. So a creative restitution is going to be when an offender on their own initiative goes beyond what's required by the courts and exceeds expectations in making it right. Part of the history of restitution goes all the way back to ancient times. In biblical times, under the Mosaic Law, individuals were required to repay of 5 to 1. Okay, so if you stole a chicken, you would have to give back 5 chickens, and so on and so forth. Hammurabi, who was prior to the biblical times, Hammurabi was as much as 30 times. Okay, if you had to replace the value of the offense that you made by up to 30 times. Roman times, the offenders paid twice as much. If he escaped that payment, he was then required to pay 3 times the value. And restitution, like we just stated, is something that has been expected throughout the history or throughout antiquity. The idea of making criminals repay their victims is, ancestral. Blood feuds were made or used for revenging injured parties. Okay? And this is before the government established justice systems and coded law and put together courts and ways to go about restoring wrongs. As wealth accumulated and societies established codes of conduct, the idea of retaliation or restitution gave way to retaliation. Okay, it also gave way, or retaliation gave way to negotiation and reparations. And we hear a lot about reparations here of late. There was this crime that was committed. You need to restore. You need to repair the wrong that you had committed. And repairing the wrong that you committed is important. Okay. And restoration or reparations is intended to restore the trust between the offender and the victim. Okay. We even found it in the United States. In the United States, during colonial America, which is before the Revolution and before we became our own country, there were no police departments. The first police department that was established inside the United States was in Boston in 1835. Granted, that's still 60 years after the country was formed and the country was created. The Constitution was 1787 or so. The Bill of Rights was in 1791. These intentions, these issues, well, to deal with crime and to deal with offenses prior to 1835, if there was an offender, let's just say, for example, that you stole my horse, and it was my only horse. Yeah, I have 2 options of what I can do. I can go hunt you down and hang you for stealing my horse. Or I could go talk to the sheriff and I can file a complaint with the sheriff. but I'd have to pay a fee to the sheriff for filing that complaint. If I found the offender and I wanted the offender to be you, the horse thief, to be arrested, I would have to pay a fee to the sheriff to file the warrant and then to serve the warrant. Then I would have to hire a private attorney to bring you to trial. If you were found guilty, you were sent to prison, I would have the responsibility of paying for your maintenance while in prison. Or if the punishment was to restore, and in early colonial America, that punishment was three times the value. So you would have to give me 3 horses, or you'd have to give me enough money to buy 3 horses. If you, as the horse thief, could not afford to pay for my horses, I could, and the courts would subject you to a period of servitude, of bonded servitude. You would become my slave, and you would remain my slave until you paid off the debt. But because you're living in my house and you are my slave, I'm required to pay for your maintenance, which you in turn will be required to refund me. So I could keep you as a slave until you paid off 3 times the value of my horse and the cost of room and board that I have spent to maintain you. I could, on the other hand, I could sell you to a plantation owner down in Georgia and you would become his slave. And this is how we found, or how we established, chattel slavery here in the United States, okay, where it was no longer a debt slavery or servitude, but it just became chattel slavery, all out of the fact that we did not have a justice system. After the revolution and after we became our own country, we started to reform things. And we wanted, the whole issue of crime became a offense to the state, not to the individual. Okay, so because as it was before, the only people that would ever find justice were the wealthy, and those people that can afford to pay the sheriff these fees, that could afford to pay the sheriff the warrant, that could afford to pay for your maintenance while you're in jail. And if there was nobody that could afford to pay those fees, if there was nobody that could repay those fees or pay for those fees, the bad guy was just set free. Because the state wasn't taxing enough to be able to maintain a prison, to be able to pay sheriffs, to be able to do the things that's necessary for justice to be served. So the reforms to the system were made because, the only people that were getting justice were the extremely wealthy and the elite. They were the only ones that could afford justice. Okay, so we hired more sheriffs. Not only did we hire more sheriffs, we hired more sheriff's deputies. We hired detectives and private detectives. We hired bounty hunters to go out and chase the bad guys and to bring the bad guys to court. And again, crime became a matter of the state, and it was funded through property taxes and sales taxes and the taxes that we as individuals paid to the government so that we could find equal protection of the law, and that the wealthy were held to account just as much as the poor, and the poor were held to account, or the poor victims were able to receive justice as well. On the flip side of that, of the criminal side, we also had what would become known as torts. And torts is where you could file civil charges against somebody that offended you, somebody that went against you and broke the law and did things to had wrongful acts against you as an individual. So the modern discovery of restitution didn't even begin until 1967, because there in 1829, in this period between 1791 and 1835, when we got a professional police force, and we got DAs, and we got prosecutors and public prosecutors, in that time frame, or after that time frame, back up, before we established a public state-run justice system, all restitution was determined by the court and only based upon the actions of the victim to go out and find restitution. Then in 1825, 1835, the first police department was 1835. I think the first DAs, the first district attorneys, started running around a little bit before that. But crime became a matter of the state, and the state was the offender, and the victim was ignored. Restitution to the victim became something that was not important to the justice system. So it was not until 1967, within my lifetime, that we started to focus on restoring the trust of the victim, where we started looking at restitution. But it was still a voluntary effort. It was not until the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 where restitution became mandatory, and everybody, especially for violent crime, you were required, the offender was required to pay restitution. And forcing restitution was the primary way of helping the victims recover their losses. Okay, so now we're talking about 1994. That's within my daughter's lifetime, my children's lifetime. Restitution is a form of rehabilitation in that wrongdoers will be sensitized to the disruption and distress that their actions, their behaviors cause to the victims. Okay, so it's a form of rehabilitation. Because, and the whole idea of rehabilitation is that you teach, you instruct, you provide treatment to the offender to show them how their actions affect the rest of the world. One of the philosophies, one of the theories that we talk about is the idea of thinking for a change. And by thinking for a change, you have you're sensitized to how your actions, how your decisions, how your behaviors affect others. And if you're forced to repay the lost wages and the medical bills and to replace the property, that will help with rehabilitation to, okay, this is affecting my pocketbook. This is affecting me now because of my actions. I caused these problems to other people, and hence, in the future, I'm not going to commit these crimes or cause these problems because, I'm concerned about society and the community. Repayment through community service and restitution and repaying medical bills and lost wages and all those things can clear an offender of their guilt. It can become a redemption, morally redeeming the offender of the crimes that they committed. It will also allow the offender to be reaccepted into society because you made it right. Yes, you found yourself making decisions that were against society, that were against this individual, but you paid your debt. You paid it off. You fixed it. You made it right. And then you should be reaccepted into the community. Yeah. It also creates a sense of accomplishment and helps build self-respect, and it helps restore self-esteem in that you have completed a legitimate achievement. You've done something legal, you've done something right, you've actually gone out of your way to do more than just go to prison. Okay. You have restored the natural order of things. Okay. They say that restitution can be a vehicle for reconciliation, because after your debt is paid, hard feelings from the victim could dissipate. Okay? And I keep hearing stories, watching movies. There's one movie that's on PureFlix right now that's called My Choice or Her Choice or something to that effect, to where she gets raped by this rapist. And she decides to keep the child, and then she forgives the rapist. No, she doesn't marry him, but she creates a relationship. She's able to find forgiveness and grace with her own heart. Yeah. And it helps him become a better person after he serves his prison time. And this restitution is probably one of the most important things in that avenue or in that manner, because that's the way that it is. Restitution is also seen as a form of punishment. Okay. Offenders go to prison to pay their debt to society, but and it's been that way for 300 years, since 1835. So 1835, so 200 and however many years. 186 years to be exact. Okay, so we're sitting here and I'm sorry, I am a little confused. Okay, there we go. We'll put that there. Okay, so please forgive me for that delay. There's a new tool on my Teams here that provides me with an automatic transcript for closed captioning, and it pops up and it reads. But anyway, as I was saying, it's a form of punishment. People go, well, I've paid my debt to society. Yes, you've paid your debt to society. You've served your prison time. You've paid your fines. You've done whatever the state has required, but you haven't restored the victim to where they were before your offense. It's been long thought that offenders get away with their crimes and their actions because they don't have to repay the victim. And this argument for restitution is something that tries to remedy and to fix that. And I think that that is an accurate depiction, because you can sit there and, the Native Aboriginal Americans, the Apache, and some of the tribes of the prairie, they had truth circles. And they had a form of restorative justice. And without making it right, without correcting the wrong that you have done, there can be no restoration within the community. So if yes, you're punished, and yes, you've sent to prison, yes, you've been given a fine, but you have not made it right with the victim of your crime. And as long as you have not made it right with the victim of your crime, there can be no restoration of justice. There can be no justice in this debate and in this thought and this argument. So some of the obstacles that we find to restitution is the fact that restitution comes in the form of money. Okay. And the economic realities of our culture limit the ability of a lot of convicts to meet their restitutional obligations. For example, the box. I'm sure some of you have filled out an application for a job. Hopefully all of you have filled out an application for a job. And one of the questions is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Yes or no? And you have to check yes if you've been convicted of a felony. And if you've been convicted of a felony, who's going to hire you? What kind of job are you going to get that will provide you with a decent living wage? And so if you can't get a job that pays a decent living wage, how are you going to pay for all of your restitution obligations along with the rest of the obligations that you have that also require parts of your income, like rent and food and utilities and your cell phone and cable and internet and all of the things that we come along with, your child support. These things cause the restitution obligations collide with the competing claims for those limited earnings. Now, another problem is street crime. A lot of the reasons why we find crime and criminality is linked to the poverty within the community. And it's an outgrowth of poverty that we find. And the desperation that is created through poverty creates and causes people to commit crime. So if you're already committing crime because you can't afford the life that you have, you can't afford the issues that you're facing, adding restitution on top of that's just going to make things worse. Restitution is predicted upon work that pays, and that's what I've already mentioned. It's forcing an individual to pay restitution depends heavily upon that individual to get a job. So it's going to be the job of the probation officer, the parole officer, to make sure that this offender can get a job. In Texas, we've got the Rio Project, or we used to have the Rio Project. As a probation officer, I had a list of employers within the jurisdiction that would hire convicted felons with understanding that they're going to pay them a wage that will help them with their restitution and to help pay those things off. Restitution is often applied to paying back child support, to elder abuse, or to pay for the fees of child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, identity theft, drunk driving, and hate crimes. Restitution and theft, property theft, is all put together and established to help restore the victim to being as close to the way it was before the offense was committed against them. Repayment can cover medical bills and therapy bills. It can replace damaged or stolen or lost property. It can pay for lost wages. Other direct costs like therapy and counseling, funeral expenses if necessary. And hopefully there is this thought that individuals will be able to repay, restore, and reestablish their place in society because they have restored trust in what they've been doing and what they are doing. Okay, and that's on the criminal side. On the civil side, plaintiffs who are the victims of crimes can sue a defendant or an offender civilly, and they can win judgments for their time. You know, punitive damages is money that's extracted from the offender to punish the offender. Okay, compensatory damages will repay the victim for expenses. I had to fix my car. I had to fix my property. I had to repair broken windows. I had medical bills. I had funeral expenses. I had all of these things. And then there's pecuniary damages, which cover lost income. I was out of work for 6 months because I was in the hospital, I was in a coma, or I was whatever. And I lost 6 months worth of income. The offender is going to have to pay for that. The most famous tort laws that I think everybody's familiar with at this time would be the O.J. Simpson case. You know, O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson, and Ron Goldman. He was tried in a criminal court, and he was found not guilty. Well, Ron Goldman's family and his children sued O.J. Simpson for wrongful death, and there was a combined settlement, not settlement, but decision by the civilian court through tort to O.J. Simpson had to pay $33 million, split equally between his children and Ron Goldman's estate. And then O.J. Simpson wrote a book called If I Did It, and all of those profits and all of the proceeds for that book went to pay Ron Goldman and his children. Guys, so that's restitution in a nutshell. If you are watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this through my class, make your comments below. I don't know that I asked any questions. I know I didn't ask any questions this time out. But if you do have any questions or comments that you would like to make about restitution, make them below. And I will see you in the future. I hope you have a great day.